I just met this young man recently in the sense that he is almost legendary in our fraternity. Humble, undoubtedly, because he came from humble beginnings out of Galesburg, Illinois, but raised in Racine, Wisconsin by his mother. Many of us know that story all too well. Went on to the University of Wisconsin, and when he hit the ground as a freshman, he hit the ground running, establishing programs, and becoming a leader on that campus. He made a decision to join his fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, at his campus. He quickly rose in the ranks of leadership, but for him that wasn't enough. And for most phenomenal men, to be at one level is just not enough. And so he ran for what we call the assistant district director, which means he was in charge of all of the college men of Alpha Phi Alpha in the state of Wisconsin. And he rose from the ranks of being that leader in the state of Wisconsin to running and becoming what we call the assistant regional vice president, meaning he was the #1 college student, leading thousands of college men in the fraternity throughout the Midwest. In that capacity, he served on the national board of the oldest and largest fraternity for African Americans. And he traveled to Bermuda, and he traveled to South Africa, and he traveled all over the country, lifting up our message and what we are attempting to do in this great fraternity. Last year, he graduated at the top of his class at the University of Wisconsin with a 3.5 GPA on a 4.0 scale. You can give him a round of applause for that. That's college work. He is now an analyst at SC Johnson, all the way in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He made the journey here tonight because for him it is extremely important to be an example for these young men. When we came up with our theme this year, Year of the Gentleman, you've seen that flyer circulate all throughout Aurora, and he chose to allow us to let him be our figurehead and our spokesmodel, if you will, for what it means to be a gentleman. It is my honor to welcome him to Aurora for his first time, coming all the way from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 2012 Phenomenal Man of the Year, one of the ranking leaders in Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in the nation. Please welcome Mr. Cameron Thierry.
Good evening. It is an honor to stand here before this distinguished crowd of change agents, leaders, proud parents, fellow young up-and-coming men, and all the guests gathered tonight. Let me just start by giving a special thanks to Brother Clayton Muhammad, my fraternity brother of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. It was through our fraternity that I first met Brother Muhammad, and when he told me about the B2M organization, I was enthused by the difference he was helping to make in the lives of young men. And immediately I told him I wish I could have been a part of an organization like this when I was coming up. And as I continued to do my research, I learned that B2M was founded upon similar principles and values of our fraternity. Through an uprising out of unacceptable social conditions, also paralleling many other member organizations of the Divine Nine, historically black fraternities and sororities. Pillars of our community that have been standing strong for over a century now, which have developed and directed our men and women to strive for excellence and be good Samaritans to the public. But what was most exciting about B2M being founded is that it took on the same fraternal philosophy at an earlier onset in the lives that hold our future. Brother Muhammad, your work and dedication to the uprising of our youth is to be highly revered. Thank you for doing what you do. Let me also thank the brothers of B2M for bestowing me such an honor, coming in as an outsider to this phenomenal organization. As I alluded to earlier, I did not come up through the organization, but my own story of defying the odds is not far from many of their own. There's an old adage that says, people often see your glory, but they don't know your story. What I've taken it to mean is that it's easier for people to recognize your highlights, but harder for them to unveil the driving force behind them. So today in my remarks, I'd like to share a little bit of my story and how viewing my own situation from a different vantage point allowed me to arrive where I am today and set me up to be able to continue on the journey of turning my dreams into realities. I grew up in a low-income, single-parent household with 3 siblings, raised solely by our mother. Together we witnessed the struggle of a woman trying to provide the basic needs for 4 children. A white woman who had fallen in love with a black man, procreated, and because of the caliber of racism still prevalent in this country, was ostracized by her own family. To add mayhem to misery, my father, who grew up in his own family saga of misfortune, found his coping mechanism of choice to be crack cocaine. My mother, while taking on the bigotry received from her family along with the physical and mental abuse from my father, also succumbed to drugs. However, fortunately and rather quickly, she realized that the decisions she was making in that realm put her children at too great a risk, and she was compelled to change. So by the time I was 4 years old, she decided to leave my father, who is still addicted to drugs today. And we moved across the country with a few bags and boxes, hoping to begin a new and better life. Initially, we lived in domestic violence shelters, and as my mother was getting on her feet, we made our way into the inner city neighborhoods. Growing up under these conditions of poverty, racism, drug abuse, father absenteeism, presented their fair share of challenges and obstacles. A lot of my manifestations into manhood were either learned vicariously or learned on the fly. Even some of the simple things we take for granted, like shaving, tying a tie, suit shopping, or talking to a lady. But what came to be the most disheartening for me growing up and transitioning from this backdrop was witnessing my siblings become products of the negative societal issues that were prevalent in our environment. From dealing drugs, to teen motherhood, to incarceration, those same stereotypes you'll see shattered here tonight if you look around the room. The labels I dodged wearing while growing up. The irony here is that I was able to make it out given the same circumstances, but my siblings weren't as lucky. There's a principle I want to hone in on here, and that's the power of seeing and believing. It is said to believe half of what you see, but I ask you, which half will you believe? Because there is a choice. Think about it. As a kid, I loved movies and would watch the same ones over and over again. Later, I realized they were my escape from reality and my beacon of possibilities. They allowed me to perceive different ways of living and realize there was much more out there in the world than what I saw day to day in my own neighborhood. However, it took some time for those diverse ways of life to cultivate into something I believed were for me. Sometimes the realities of living in your own situation can make another situation seem so out of touch and unrelatable that you can't imagine yourself attaining it. Even after catching a firsthand glimpse of an example from the other side, it may fail to encourage you if you accept as true the notion that the example was merely an exception and not akin to your community. To know that a subculture exists, but to feel too far from it to experience it, that's seeing and not believing. But when you couple the two together, you can be driven to venture out and give it a try. I remember riding my bike down the blocks of the Fortune 500 company I work for now as a kid, which is located in the inner city neighborhood I grew up in. At that time, I didn't quite understand what that structure was. It simply seemed to be a vacant series of buildings that stood across the street from a field we would play baseball and kickball in. I remember trying to look into some of the opaque windows from behind the gates, but never could quite see through. One of the main buildings on campus was supposedly built with Pyrex glass tubing from the ceilings and around the upper base of the building to only let soft light in, but also to keep employees from gazing out of the window so that they remain focused on their work. At that time, which was during the 1930s, I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright, the designer, realized the vision into a whole new world that will be obscured some 70 years later from those that resided on the outskirts of the company, who could benefit from seeing paradigms of positive ultimatums within their own community today. In grade school, we took trips to the theater on the company's campus, but even then, I still didn't grasp the fact that it was a Fortune 500 company and what that meant. People even came from all over the world to tour the Frank Lloyd Wright structure, and I never took the opportunity to do so when it was a treasure right in my own backyard, one I didn't even know existed. It wasn't until I finished high school and started figuring out what college really was and thinking about majoring in business that I understood what the company I grew up seeing all along represented. And as my belief began to settle in, I was fortunate enough to earn a scholarship and an internship opportunity sustainable throughout my undergraduate studies from the company. From then on, I stopped seeing things unfamiliar to me as distant and instead decided to learn how to bring them closer. The lesson learned here was not to let your circumstances overshadow your opportunity. It's funny to think that the dark can be more illuminating than the light, but it can. Some of your darkest moments can turn out to be some of your brightest struggles that later develop into blessings in disguise. That's what happens when you not only see what's right, but you also understand and believe it's right for you and choose to do it. Today it seems that we are amongst the most equipped generation that adversely also happens to be the lost generation. With this dichotomy arising because too many of us are left searching for a sense of direction. Throughout my travels over the past year, I learned that this search of direction doesn't stop at country borders. It doesn't stop at race, at creed, or color. So many are reaching out for an example, but receiving the wrong ones, which is why it is imperative we continue to reach back, to continue to bring light into some of the darker places. Today I am labeled as a phenomenal man, but that is not what I want you to see. I hope that you see me as an ordinary man who strives to do what's right and make guided decisions, to say no when others said yes, and to stand up for what I believed in. No special recognition is needed for doing what you're supposed to do. But what I like that we're doing here tonight is highlighting it more and allowing it to serve as a proper paradigm. I am both humbled and privileged to be where I am today, and I do not take the opportunities that have been granted to me along the way lightly. Some may view my upbringing as a disadvantage, but I see it as an advantage, engendering a burning desire to be successful and make an imprint on the world during my life. An internal desire composed of great focus, drive, and a strong work ethic can compel you to strive for excellence. Aristotle once said, "Excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. Choice, not chance, determines your destiny. Never grow weary in doing what's right. Try to evade all the wrongs because they'll make you lose sight. Make the choices now that will not limit you to anything less than you deserve later. Boys and men, thank you for injecting dreams, instilling ambition, idolizing opportunity, and invoking change. Teaching young boys of color and boys from disadvantaged backgrounds to tell themselves, I am great, in a world where most of what they see tells them different. The return on that investment you are making is invaluable. Thank you, and God bless.
Round of applause, 2012 Phenomenal Man of the Year, and Thierry. Regional leader for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. One of our most profound young leaders in the fraternity, so profound in fact that our national president, General President Herman Skip Mason, in the midst of his tour in Liberia, Africa, stopped his tour in Africa to send an email to say congratulations to you. And he's so proud of you. To hear from our national president who leads 250,000 alphas since we were founded is definitely big indeed. So we are so honored to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, Cameron Thierry.